Good afternoon. My name is Roz McCarthy, founder and CEO of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, and you're here with my good friends at the Arcview Group as we talk about the ways that we can look at diversifying and creating opportunity in the cannabis industry. First and foremost, I want to say hi to everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Feel free to make sure that you put your comments in the chat room or any questions that you may have. First and foremost, we want to thank Arcview for so much for having this conversation. When we talk about creating a more inclusive cannabis industry, it's so important to remember that Arcview was the first cannabis and hemp-centric organization that provided and supported capital in the capital ecosystem, providing millions of dollars of investment dollars towards businesses that are entering into the cannabis and hemp industry. If it were not for an organization like Arcview that's able to look at the financial and the support that's needed to help these organizations and businesses grow, we would be without the resources to be able to see just the abundance of new businesses that are coming to the forefront. Arcview also has a consulting services. It also provides venture funds as well as crowdfunding platform. So for that, we want to tell you and say thank you to Arcview. Now, let's get started. So besides welcoming everybody to the program, I want to talk about why we're here today. We're here because we're talking about inclusivity and talking about how do we create a more inclusive cannabis industry. We love this industry. This industry is our industry. We love the plant. And when you love the plant and when you want to be and you want to provide this plant in a way that is going to be open for all communities, we cannot walk away from the fact that there is an inclusive issue within the industry. I'm super proud as an advocate, as a business owner to talk about this. And today we have a super panel that's put together that's going to give you impactful conversation. We're going to have discussion, but not only discussion, we're going to have solution. What do we need to do? How do we move the ball down the field? So without further ado, let's welcome our panel today. I'm so super proud to invite you to know them as I've known them and be able to have them share with you their perspective. First, we have Mr. Steve DeAngelo, the founder of Last Prisoner Project. Next, we have Evelyn LaChapelle, a member of the Last Prisoner Project, as well as we have Amber Littlejohn, Executive Director for Minority Cannabis Business Association. Hi, guys. How are you?
Hi, Roz.
Hi, Amber. How are you?
Good. Always a pleasure to see you.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you to Arcview for having me here today.
Absolutely. Amber, as we have you on first, please give everybody a quick 30-second brief overview about who you are and what you do and why you're fantastic in this industry.
I love it. My name is Amber Littlejohn. I am the Executive Director of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. We are a national trade association serving minority cannabis entrepreneurs. We have over 300 members, majority minority. We serve a multitude of individuals who are both in the cannabis industry and aspiring to get into the cannabis industry. Heavy focus on policy and engagement. We have model state ordinances, model state policies, and we are heavily engaged on the federal level as well in shaping the discussion around equitable cannabis reform.
Awesome. So thank you so much. Evelyn LaChapelle, are you there?
I am here. Thank you so much for having me.
So great to have you. Please introduce yourself to everyone.
Yes, and I'm running it through in my head. I'm like, there's so much. But first, I am the Community Engagement Manager at Last Prisoner Project, and that's a new title. So I had to remember what I'm doing there. But I am with Last Prisoner Project, really just pushing this movement forward because I am also formerly incarcerated for a cannabis conviction. I spent 87 months in prison for this plant. And so my job title since release has really just been advocating and sharing the message and building a more equitable industry.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with us so much. I can't wait to hear your story and just be inspired and think about ways that we move forward. And last but not least, you know him, I know him, we love him, we thank him. He's the godfather of cannabis. I know he may not claim that title, but we give it to him. Let's introduce Mr. Steve DeAngelo. Steve, you there?
I'm here, Roz. Thank you so much.
Hey, how are you, brother? It's good to see you.
It's great to be here. Wonderful to be with this panel.
Please, for those who may not know, but please give a little intro about yourself, sir.
Oh, I fell in love with the cannabis plant when I was 13 years old. And since then, I've tried to do everything that I could think of with the plant, especially make it legal and get our prisoners out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the work you're doing from the private side to the public side, helping and working with those prisoners and those folks that have been most harmed is just extraordinary. So we thank you so much. And so let's get started, guys. When we talk about inclusivity, the first thing that first people think about is social equity. And social equity is so key and so important. But from your perspective, can we look at where we are right now versus maybe where we were 5 years ago, and where you see, what have you seen that you've been excited about, but what are some areas that you're concerned about? And I'll throw it to you, Amber, first.
Well, I think the thing that is most exciting is that the conversation, that equity has become central in the conversation around legalization in all but a very few jurisdictions, and definitely it's become central on the federal level. So that's the promising aspect, is that
Sure.
people are saying, hey, if we're going to legalize, we need to make these considerations. We need to get people out of prison. We need to stop arresting people. We need to create opportunities for people of color. So that is reassuring. What is not so reassuring is, as we're looking back 5 years, and as we've had this run on adult use and complete legalization throughout the states, we are still not seeing this industry diversify. We are still not actually seeing minority ownership. We are in the places where we maybe have a minority name on a license, it still doesn't amount to meaningful ownership or a thriving business, or the ability to create generational wealth, or the ability to try and help and heal and restore your community. So I would love to see us a lot further along. I would love us to be able to look 5 years now, into this process and say, hey, wow, half of the people operating cannabis businesses are minorities, but unfortunately, we can't even say 20.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, Steve, same question for you. Amber's excited about the conversation that's going on, but concerned about just in regards to the actual execution. What's your thoughts, sir?
Well, it's been a disappointment. 5 years ago, when we started seeing the first social equity licensing provisions being passed, there was the hope that they would really lead to a market increase in diversity and the industry. That hasn't happened. In fact, in the state of California, we saw a step backwards in diversity following 2018, largely because there was an influx of new investors into the industry who didn't really care very much about diversity. So I think the disappointment has flowed mainly from the fact that even where deserving people have received social equity licenses, they've basically been put in an impossible business situation where the only sources of capital that they've been able to access, this is not 100%, but generally, most of the sources of capital that have been available to social equity licensees have not been good situations. They've been predatory investors who have done their best to trade people out of the licenses as quickly as they can at the lowest cost possible. So for me, there's a huge missing piece here, and the industry really needs to step up to the plate and make it possible for people who get social equity licenses to actually execute on them without losing them and giving them up.
No, I agree 100%. Evelyn, you are a social equity applicant. You are someone that you're in the midst of repairing the harms that have been done, that you suffered. Your thoughts on the promise, but also you're walking that you're in that sweet zone right now where you can talk about like how's it affecting you, the process, and where you see that there's some gaps where you're not, it hasn't fulfilled its promise in regards to these different programs.
I would say that no, it has not fulfilled its promise. And 5 years ago, I was not the only one, but I was certainly still sitting in prison for this plant. And I come home, and my first panel that I sat on with Steve, DeAngelo, Al Harrington, and For the Movement. And that was actually my first time ever hearing the word social equity. So there's already a gap of realizing that these programs exist. How do we make them more available? How do we even get the word out, right? Because I'm sitting on a panel with really major thought leaders. And I'm on the panel, and that's my first time ever even hearing that there was an opportunity there for me. And I'm not an applicant yet because I am still on probation, which excludes me from being an applicant.
Gotcha.
But where I do see the industry having opportunity to assist and create lanes for those of us who have not had the opportunity at an application, at a social equity application, is through partnerships. And Steve told me this over a year ago because I was like, I can't get an industry, but I could white label, right? So I'm in the process of creating a space for me. And I think that sort of removes this predatorial state when we're talking about licensing, because you're not owning I'm not trying to own a piece of a dispensary, a piece of a distribution, but I can create a brand that can generate my own wealth or my own income so that I'm not put in that same position when it's time for my equity license.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that you're doing is smart, especially when we know, Steve, that the funding is an issue. How do we get over the funding issue? If we can't get investors to see the promise of social equity, how do we connect with maybe the tax revenue that's being generated through these different states? What's our next, opportunity when it comes to fund these businesses and understand, that the funding is not just $5,000 just to kind of get your business formation. So.
Well, I think that there's certainly a role for the mainstream industry to step in, and exactly how that works, I'm not sure. But if you take a look at the amount of resources that are coming into the cannabis industry, we're talking about billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. Some type of mechanism needs to be set up so that some of those billions of dollars are made available to people so that they can actually execute on the social equity licenses without having to form partnerships that are predatory, that are going to trade them out of the licenses. I'm working on a project myself that I'm not quite ready to talk about, that it seeks to accomplish that goal. And I'm certainly interested in talking to people in the industry about that. But I think it takes more than one effort. I think that just like the industry and the movement has put together multiple different equity organizations, multiple organizations that are moving forward to release our prisoners, we need to see the same thing in the industry. This is a test for the industry. It's a test of our soul. It's a test of our moral character. It's simply not enough to say the government's going to take care of this thing. Anybody who's successful in the cannabis industry, anybody who has the ability to access resources, has an obligation to make sure that some of those resources are directed into the hands of people who have been excluded from ownership opportunities in this country ever since they were brought here in chains.
So, Amber, is this a state conversation? Like Steve just said something that was key. How do we got billions and billions of dollars that is being generated by the industry. So is this a recognizing and working with our state lawmakers to create policy? And you are the policy guru. Do we do it at the federal level, the state level? Let's come up with a solution. Where do you think we should go with this?
Well, I think one of the things that's really critical is that we look at where are the sticking points? Where are the barriers? Where are the financial barriers? And Steve said something about recommitting and looking at how we're thinking about this. And when it comes to the large companies, they're thinking about this. They're thinking about capital. They're looking at public bonds. They're looking at tax rebates, things that are being explored by large operators in New York. And we need to be looking at scaling those things either down or up to be able to support social equity operators. So it's really from the private sector, and that involves companies taking a look at what equity actually means to them and what sufficient action means. And it's not about maybe sponsoring or supporting a single operator. It's not about running a program. It's not even just about investing in expungement clinics. It is about completely rethinking the policy that you're advocating for on the state level and making sure that the advantage on top of advantage on top of advantage that you have as a large operator, especially the medical operators that are getting a head start a lot of times, they're heavily capitalized, they're getting priority in licensing, that they need to be really taking a look at their privilege and their financial advantages that they have, and then taking a look and evaluating what they need to be doing. So there's the private, there's the state. Again, funding needs to come in long before the point of application, which means that whatever resources are brought to bear can't be dependent on adult use tax revenues, or the assistance is going to be coming after it's needed, especially in a capped market. On the federal level, safe banking. We need access to capital. And we need to make sure that when safe banking rolls out, that there is coverage and additional opportunities for the financial institutions most likely to lend to people of color, things like community banks and minority-owned banks as well.
No, I love it. I think just your points are so on point. And I think when we talk about this, Evelyn, your situation is so clear. Can you speak on the fact that there's other different ways outside of touching plant that we can really breathe life into social equity, especially when this really important point, guys, everyone that has been harmed, that would be qualified as social equity may not want to come into the cannabis industry. What's the promise that we owe them for that janitorial service, or that guy that's been harmed but doesn't want to be in the industry but wants to someone to help breathe life into his business? What's that look like, Evelyn?
Absolutely. I think this industry has an obligation to create a lane or create a space, or I like to say a seat at the table. And so my introduction into the legal space was through Vertosa as their community engagement manager. And I don't say that it is never my intention to open a retail space, but I don't have retail experience, has never had interest in having retail experience. And so for the industry to only be focused on that, it's closing other doors. It's not holding other companies accountable for their hiring practices. I just learned that Black women own a majority of the buying power in this space because we are already have experience with the plant, so we're not afraid of walking into the dispensary, and we're just naturally shoppers. Like, we own 70% of shopping in general. And so to hear that and recognize that Black women have buying power, but there is no, there's a lack of Black-owned women brands, I think that there's so many ways to make a space for us, for those who have been incarcerated. Like you said, through, I won't even say janitorial, but there is ancillary businesses up the wall, right? Yeah. Across the board in this industry. And I'm just learning, like, I just sealed a partnership with Green Haven, and she has manufacturing and distribution licenses that allows me to sell my likeness. Evidence has created a partnership. Cookies has created partnerships that allows people in my position to still take back a piece of the pie, right? Because there's 40,000 people still incarcerated for this plant. And I think that this industry has more power than they do, right? So when New York legalizes, for me, I'm like, there's no way you don't say, New York, we're about to raise $1 billion in tax dollars for you. Attached to that tax dollar needs to be the decriminalization or the retroactive release of those inmates. And I just don't think that this industry has made that a part of their mission.
I love it. I love it. Steve, I think one thing that we're missing, and there needs to be a conversation, I want your thoughts on this, in regards to business mentorship and also understanding on funding and how to acquire funding, understanding equity finances versus debt financing, crowdfunding. Like, what's your position in regards to those intangibles? That's not money, but that's just so super powerful when you need that support to help you figure out how to kind of to create your path.
You know, one of the very biggest challenges that I've had in my career, which, you know, I started selling weed when I was 13 years old, and most of my career was underground in the traditional market. And when I came above ground, the thing that was most challenging for me, and to be honest, the thing that I was least successful at managing, was finances, was money.
Yeah.
First, just managing money, because in the gray market, in the underground market, financial records were evidence, and so we didn't keep them. There was no opportunity to develop a great deal of competency there. But then, once you get into a legal realm and you can actually keep books and understand what's going on with your business, then you get to the point where if you've been reasonably successful at that stage, you need to start thinking about scaling up. And that's where it starts getting really tricky, because we're not told about how to find sources of capital in school. We're not taught that kind of financial literacy. And even in my family, I grew up in a white middle class family, and I was taught what entrepreneurship was, but I wasn't taught the difference between an angel investor or a mezzanine investor. I didn't know what an exit plan was. I didn't understand how to value a company or even really what that meant. And so there's this whole step that needs to be taken. Once you've got a little bit of success, once you've got something that's pretty easy to wrap yourself around and it's succeeding, then there's the jump of where you really start engaging with the economic system as a whole and needing to scale up. And, my advice there is be really, really careful. The trust is going to be the most important thing. And as someone who made some mistakes in that regard, you can have a tremendous amount of success. And if you don't get that capitalization piece just right, you can be set back, pretty significally. So I don't have an answer for it. I'll say that it's critically important. And again, it's something that I'm working on. I think that access to non-predatory capital is the single biggest challenge in the social equity community right now, and that's what we need to focus on. And I'm convinced that if we can just get the resources into our people's hands in some kind of non-predatory way, that we're going to see things in this industry we've never been seen before. One of the quotes I've been sharing these days comes from the great Vietnamese revolutionary Ho Chi Minh, who fought the American Empire to a standstill in Vietnam. And he said, when the prison doors open, the real dragons fly out.
Yeah. Steve, man, you said, just so on point in your discussion and your points. I think, you did come up with a solution. So we're all about solutions today. So solution one is not one, but one important one. And let's figure it out together offline. But we need to create an education forum for these businesses in regards to the financial instruments, and have someone really being able to walk them through what that means, and being able to understand predatory contracts versus it's in real estate and everything. So I think your point was just right on target. You guys, last week and over, I guess the last month, there's been so many different conversations of new social equity programs in different states. And also we had a bummer last week when we saw the state of Mississippi, the Supreme Court, ended up ruling against when 74% of voters vote yes for a medical marijuana program, and you get a judicial branch that says no. It makes you pause. Amber, just on the Mississippi situation, I want to kind of go rapid fire. What was your thoughts when you saw that last week, and what does that do to quelch and to suppress the diversity and equity conversation in cannabis?
I am not entirely sure that I was terribly optimistic about diversity in cannabis in Mississippi to begin with. But when we are continuing to have people around legislatures, judiciary around the country that are continuing to perpetuate the fear and continue this racist, very clearly racist war against, our communities, it's always going to be a setback. So my greatest concerns are that it continues the oppression of our communities through prohibition. When it comes to the industry, again, that isn't really where my heart sank the most. It really kind of, again, if we are rolling back legalization, we are continuing these practices that are oppressive within our communities. So again, my hopes were incredibly high, which is heartbreaking because Mississippi, given the disparate enforcement of marijuana laws there and around the country, especially when we're getting into rural southern communities, people of color should absolutely have the vast majority of the market in Mississippi. But that is what we were gearing up to see. That is not what we're going to see in Georgia. with the 30 licenses and the $1 million buy-in. That is not what we're going to see in Georgia. It wouldn't have been what we see in Mississippi, and it won't be in any other state with a lot of people of color and hugely disparate arrest rates because of, again, the capital issue. And again, that's why it's really important that we're being aggressive and getting funds and resources to people.
It goes back to policy, right? Which you got to set the good policy. Evelyn, your thoughts on just, again, when you look at this day and age of having something that was overturned, I don't know if you followed it or what have you, but would love your thoughts as well.
Not surprised. I have been extremely jaded of our government and our policy, and so sorry about the noise on construction. And so when I think moving forward, it's our responsibility. It's going to be the industry's responsibility going forward.
No, I love it. I love it. Steve, on another side note, we had a couple of weeks ago, three to 4 weeks ago, the state of New York produced one of the most progressive adult use bill that we've seen that has a strong social equity focus centric to the rollout of an adult use program. What were your thoughts on it, just in general, from what you're hearing from that? And are you excited about what you see, or are you cautiously excited, or your thoughts?
Well, I am excited about New York. I'd say cautiously excited. But before I go there, let me just jump back to Mississippi for a minute.
Yes, please.
In the same 48-hour period that the Supreme Court of Mississippi struck down the will of 74% of the voters, the Court of Appeals, the appeals court just below the Supreme Court, affirmed a life sentence without parole for Russell Allen. And Alan Russell, excuse me. And he was convicted for possession of 30 grams of cannabis in Mississippi. So this is, just what can you say in a situation where they're simultaneously giving sentences like that and then taking away the power of anybody to change it? It's just it's just like Mississippi, God damn, right?
Yeah.
It's just really hard. I'm still wrapping myself around that one. New York is a promise. It's a promise that we have to claim. If we don't go and claim it, we're not going to get it. So New York was on a trajectory to be much like Georgia. We had Governor Cuomo who was saying no home grow, and we're going to auction off the licenses to the highest bidders. And the only reason that did not happen in New York is because the governor got caught with his hands in the wrong places. And because of this harassment scandal that he's been suffering from, he decided that he was going to give in to all the demands of the cannabis community, basically, and give us a really, really good bill so it could get passed, so it could get his troubles off of the headlines. So we have some incredible things. They say there's going to be 50% social equity licenses. They say that cottage licenses that allow people to grow a 3,000 square foot canopy and directly retail out of that facility are going to be possible. They don't say how many of them there are going to be there, right? So they say that social equity licensees are going to be able to start from the same point as everybody else, but we don't know. There's big companies in New York who already have dispensaries that are open. So are they going to be allowed to open their adult use dispensaries in front of social equity licensees? All of this still needs to be wrestled out. But we've got incredible things. We've got consumption lounges. Anywhere in the state of New York that it's legal to smoke a cigarette, it's legal to smoke a joint. And, for those of you who haven't been to New York City, it's a really, really big deal. I mean, me and many, many people just so many times gotten jacked up smoking a joint on the sidewalk of New York City. It's been such a terror kind of experience for so many people for so long. You end up in Rikers Island. And, I was walking from one side of the city to the other. There was a lot of traffic. I decided I was going to walk. I had a little bit of time, smoke a joint before my next meeting. I stopped right in the middle of a traffic island. I sat down on a bench. I pulled out a big bag of weed. I rolled up a spliff and I started blazing away with no fear, right? It was just a remarkable thing. So look, What we know about freedom is nobody's going to give it to us, that we have to demand it and we have to seize it. But we have a small piece of ground to fight on in New York.
No, I love it. I love it. And that's what we're fighting for every single day, of being able to have that freedom and not feel like, and especially our Black and Brown community, that you're going to be targeted because of this plan. Amber, the same thing in regards to New York, the promise of it. And we got other different states like Virginia that, again, adult use, and they're trying to figure it out. So we see that this is these statutes and this the framework of what could be such a beautiful opportunity. But my concern is that we may have a situation like Illinois, which had a great, I think, it wasn't a perfect bill, but it was definitely a bill that was focused on making sure the social equity was supported. And unfortunately, it did not bear fruit. And so I would love your thoughts, Amber.
Yeah, so I definitely want to applaud the work that was done in New York, because it is definitely a big, giant statement for equity. Unfortunately, the state of New York really didn't invest in studies into the economic, social impact of disparate arrests, or really any of the things that are going to help the state to be able to actually implement policies that can get them to 50% and pass constitutional muster. So right there, that is a challenge. There is also the issue of the definition of social equity is very, very, very broad, and it includes plenty of people who have not actually technically been impacted by the disparate enforcement of cannabis laws. And we're facing a situation, because the bill was pushed through, as Steve mentioned, because of the unique political situation, or maybe not so unique political situation that was going on there. It was pushed through, and a lot was left to the regulatory process. And people look at a bill and they say, "Oh, I saw the word the phrase social equity popped up like 50 times, and it says minority 20 times." But they're not looking at the provisions that exist beyond the social equity sections, like caps, advantages given to medical operators, or even whether a block on vertical integration is the way to go. Because right now, medical operators can vertically integrate. So they're going to benefit from the economies of scale. They're going to be able to benefit from the efficiencies that come from that. And nobody else but micro businesses. And maybe micro businesses will be a great thing. Maybe they're going to look like New Jersey, when they are going to be non-viable, non-sustainable options. So I will say, on a solutions level, if you care about equity, the fight is not over. It is actually just beginning when it comes to the minority industry. And so you need to stay involved and stay really vigilant, and reach out to the companies that are on the ground already, the medical operators in New York, and tap them on the shoulder and just say, "Hey, what are you going to be doing at this point?" So tell us how you're going to be supporting minority businesses there. And so they're definitely creative in figuring out how they're going to finance their big, giant 450,000 square foot facilities there. So I would love to see some of that creativity carry over. It's important for people to realize, especially on the investment side. I think they have social equity over here in just like a moral, social, feel good PR kind of a category, and not really looking at the bottom line benefits of social equity when it comes to long-term risk and opportunity management, and being able to take advantage long-term with, again, you have a heavily regulated consumer product. You need to be heavily engaging the communities, especially communities with health disparities, criminal enforcement disparities, really just as a bottom line perspective, and looking at the benefits, again, of just diversity within your own company. So I am hopeful that companies will stop thinking of social equity as just this thing we have to do now for PR purposes, and really looking at the bottom line benefits, and that they consider that going into New York.
Yeah, and I think there's so many wonderful benefits from diversity, inclusiveness. Equity creates culture. Culture creates happiness. Happiness creates people wanting to work, and folks want to come and experience your retail or want to experience your product. So, and consumers, and we must not forget, when legalization happens, consumers are going to have more options because there may be interstate type of commerce and different opportunities where now the consumer drives where the dollars go, and not just because of someone being in a state and not being able to do business outside of that state. So with that being said, Steve and Evelyn, we can't talk about diversity and inclusiveness in the industry without talking about the social justice aspect of this industry and how important it is. And, I want to start with you, Steve, and then Evelyn, in your role. Can you just give everyone just a little insight in regards to your vision of starting Last Prisoner Project, or being one of the founders or the founder, and just the promise of your organization, what you've done thus far, and where you want to go? And I just want our audience to get insight about Last Prisoner Project.
The vision for the Last Prisoner Project really came to me in 2017. It was after California had passed its adult use bill. And like a lot of, but it was before 2018 when it went into effect, right? So like a lot of cannabis executives from California, I was up in Canada looking for capital, looking for money to grow into this, what we thought was going to be a much larger market. And one afternoon, I found myself at the top floor of a very impressive skyscraper, sitting at a very long conference table with some really important people. And we were looking at business plans, cannabis business plans. And there were literally hundreds of millions of dollars that were on that table that people were thinking about and planning towards. And towards the end of the day, my phone starts vibrating. And I normally don't answer the phone in that kind of situation, but I did because it was my buddy Chuck who was calling me from Pennsylvania, where he'd been locked up for transporting 14 pounds of weed from California to Pennsylvania for 4 years. And it was a grim phone call, because it's just grim to talk to your friends when they're in prison. And so I came back into this room where it felt very different, right? Everybody was still really happy. There were still hundreds of millions of dollars on the table. And I looked at that and I just knew that for me personally, that I had to do something, right? That I couldn't know that my friend Chuck was sitting there in prison and I was out talking about hundreds of millions of dollars worth of business plans on the table, that I had to do something. And then the second thing that I realized was that that wasn't the only conversation that was happening that afternoon. There were lots of conversations like that happening. And if you added up all of the dollars on all of those tables and all of those rooms, it's a vast amount of money. So if we can pull off, not a lot, pull off 1 or 2% of that money, we can get our prisoners out. We can do. It's actually something that's possible. And so that's when the vision was born. It's a very simple vision. It's just that as we grow this worldwide global industry that's creating millionaires and billionaires already, that we have to make sure we don't leave anybody behind, that the mostly Black and brown people who are doing time for cannabis are released as this industry is being built. And fortunately, been fairly successful so far in going to the industry and making that argument to them.
No, I love it. Evelyn, in your role, your new role, just talk about how important it is and what this organization means to you from a businesswoman, but also your advocacy, and you perform your advocacy through the Last Prisoner Project.
Absolutely. And performing my advocacy really has been the best work that Last Prisoner Project has offered me and allowed me to do. But I'm just going to take 2 steps back, because Amber said something that really just struck a chord with me about social equity not being another PR stunt here, right? And so I realized literally just a few weeks ago, there was, and this is with literally no disrespect to GTI, but earlier pre-COVID, GTI produced a beautiful documentary about my life's journey, my imprisonment, my transition back into life. And I'm just learning that they're one of the third largest cannabis organizations in this country. And in producing that piece, it allowed them to highlight their piece into social equity, or social justice. But I still didn't have groceries in the refrigerator. right? And not saying that that was a PR stunt, but saying that it needs to be more personable when we are saying that we are assisting and wanting to assist. It should not be, and I use the word should not that often, but it should not be on a broader scale. There's so many of us who have returned home. There's so many of us still incarcerated, and it needs to be a more personable approach into the hands of constituents. And so Last Prisoner Project is doing an amazing job at that. And I've not experienced working for any other nonprofits, but what we decided to do at the beginning of this year, at the beginning of January, was building out a program where constituents who are returning home can tap directly into resources, into funds. And there's so many programs that would tell us, you don't give money to folks just coming out of prison. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to handle it. And I'm here to say, I just got out of prison. I'm a college graduate. There's nothing that says I don't know what to do with cash in my pocket, but we have this notion that inmates returning home are inmates, are criminals, and we've separated them from the rest of the world. And so just to tell you what we're doing at Last Prisoner Project, with Steve's idea, it was to help release the 40,000 who are still incarcerated, clemency help, legal teams, etc. And then my reentry back into society would have a hotel coworker Google my name, and I was fired on the spot. And then because of that, with Sarah and Mary, we have built this reentry program where folks coming home, we're doing great outreach right now, and our numbers are increasing across the country. But we have cannabis education scholarships, webinars every month on job placement, reentry services. And then there's the micro grant program, and that micro grant also extends to dependents, right? Because if I'm still incarcerated, my daughter still needs to eat. And so how does the industry do that? And I think we've grown very well in the last, it'll be almost 2 years in August. So I know that the industry is hearing us. I know that they are definitely reaching into their pockets to support us. And I know firsthand that the work is being done. And I would love to see the entire industry, one, make this more personable, see that there is a face, see that there's a story. This is not 40,000. This is not a number. Like, these are real people, and some of them look just like me, right? And so there's 40,000 me's in prison, and so A, you make that personable, and then B, you build it into your mission to support that.
I think you summed it up perfectly. That the number one aha I got from your just thorough conversation was that I'm a person, and that don't look at me as a person and don't utilize me as an opportunity to uplift your own organization or your own things that you want to do for your company to grow, be it if you're going to go public or anything of that nature. Do what you want to do with genuineness in your heart. So I love it. Guys, we got about 2.5 minutes, and Amber did something and the team over at MCBA did something so super special yesterday. I had a chance to be a part of it. And I really want to have her give us a good 1.5 minutes, Amber, if you can. Just talk about the impact of yesterday and just the brainchild behind what you put together, and just some of those aha moments and things that you walked away with and understanding about when we talk about legalization. And we talk about the opportunity at the federal level, how you and MCBA are leading the charge in that respect. Would love to just hear from your perspective, please.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday was really, yesterday at MCBA, we put on a federal policy forum. We covered both federal policy from the perspective of operators. We covered the intersection of criminal justice reform and industry. And then lastly, coalition building. And really the goal of yesterday was to expand the conversation. So often people have the talking points identified about what we're going to talk about when it comes to equity. Equity extends through all of it. Equity relates to not only diversity in the industry, it relates to funding, it relates to the regulations, it relates to the criminal justice reform. there are elements of it that we threw out. And so if we are not looking at every aspect of cannabis policy through the lens of equity, we are missing out. We are creating barriers. We are excluding people from conversations. So the biggest takeaway is for every conversation you are having about cannabis, you need to have the perspective of equity. You need to have the perspective of our community. You need to have the perspective of previously incarcerated people. You need to have the perspective of operators, current and aspiring, because they are relevant in every single conversation that happens around cannabis. Not just diversity conversations, not just D&I, not just equity, but they are relevant in every single conversation.
Everything does not matter. Every part of our conversation. And there's a place for us to have the conversation. You know what, guys? We got to do a part 2. Will you all agree that we come back part 2 of this? Because we haven't even touched on questions and comments and things that we need to cover. But right now, guys, we are going to have our question and answer period. This is your time to talk to us. Give us, you have questions. Some of the questions we've already answered, but we'll re-answer it again. We want to walk away with solutions. So Sarah, are you there, my friend?
I am. I'm ready for you.
Hi. All right.
Hi.
All right. Take it away.
So, Roz, I'm actually going to flip this back on you, and
Okay.
I want you to talk about yourself and your organization for a little bit, too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, again, Roz McCarthy, founder and CEO of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. We are the nation's largest community-based organization as a 501c3. We're based in Orlando, Florida. We have 29 chapters throughout the country, 3 international chapters. I think my folks over in the UK are on. So, hey, Kesh. And so we're in Toronto as well as in Jamaica. And then we have 2 historically Black college university chapters a part of the organization. In a simple, we focus on 4 areas: public policy, health equity, social justice. We are celebrating our 5-year anniversary this month. So I started this organization May 10th, 2016. And I didn't have any friends that had funding. I did it off of pure just, I lost my son. I lost my mom to breast cancer, and my son has sickle cell. So for me, it was just a passion and a mission of wanting to make sure that Black and brown communities normalize the conversation about cannabis and about the option of utilizing it for your healthcare needs. And shout out to all of my leadership team that's watching today. If you want to check us out, learn about what we're doing, we've created over 50,000 hours of video, webinar, in person, and have worked with so many different organizations. And we love the folks at Arcview. And thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, Roz, and thank you, everyone. And there are a few questions, so I'm going to just dive into that because I know everybody wants to hear from all of you. So I saw this a couple times in the chat and in the Q&A. So how do we justify so few minorities getting venture capital funding, less than 5%? So I don't know if it's, justification via the question, but let's chat about that. And even Steve, you've seen a lot even just through the old Arcview days and too. Let's talk about venture capital specifically.
Well, this is one of the main pillars of systemic racism in our country, and people of color, especially Black people, have been denied ownership opportunities first by law and then by circumstances, and that sits with us, right? And so there's this generational impact, and so it's almost all the people who are in the venture world are white people. There's very few representation of people of color in that area, and so you have a huge amount of implicit bias that's just completely unrecognized within that community. And I've engaged with them. And there are some conscious people within the venture community, but I would say that as a whole, that community, which is mainly white people, is largely unaware of their implicit bias. And that implicit bias puts entrepreneurs of color at a disadvantage before they even walk into the room, and in ways that you might not even really be. They may be completely irrational ways that you can't even anticipate or identify. So, I think that it really needs to be called out in a serious way. I think, the kind of conversation that's going on now is the first step. Really, the community needs to holler and holler loud so that people who right now are really enmeshed and trapped behind layers of implicit bias are shaken awake and start hearing what's really going on. And it's the same story over and over and over again. Whenever a person of color, just about any time a person of color is able to actually get access to a cannabis opportunity, their challenges in capitalizing it are almost impossible. And I don't have an answer now. I wish I did have an answer. Right now, I'm at the stage of we really need to holler about the problem as loud as we can, and hope to wake up people of good conscience. And on my part, like I said earlier, my major focus over the course of the next couple of years is going to be finding ways to encourage the major players in the cannabis industry to provide real, tangible support so that people who actually get licenses can develop them and can keep them and can thrive.
Absolutely.
And
Thank you,
can I
Steve.
add to that?
Please, Evelyn.
I also think, because Steve mentioned this earlier, is that there is the education. We're missing that, right? I'm in the midst of launching my own brand, 87, and doing it, reaching into my own pocketbook and reaching into Dad's pocketbook. But because there is not the education is lacking in how do you access these funds as well. What do you need to bring to the table? How prepared do you need to be? And I've been fortunate enough to come across a mentor, Nathan from Rose Edibles out of San Francisco, that has, offered his time to step by step. But that is also a major piece. And I don't know how we fix that. I don't know. And I have a business degree in entrepreneurship, right? But the cannabis industry is so different, and you can't apply everything to this industry that I think my community is also missing that piece of where are the doors that you even begin to knock on? I don't know. I know Arcview, but I don't know any other doors.
Yeah, and I'd love to open that to the floor too. So Roz and Amber, if you have, and Steve, any resources as well, and we can even segue into the incubators and talk a little bit about that. But Amber, do you want to start off with that?
I will just say, in terms of solutions, that there needs to be a reassessment of risk, because the justification for systemic racism, what's backed up and justified systemic racism in lending, as this idea of risk. And this is an inherently risky industry. So you can't come into an inherently risky industry and just say, you over there, when you have companies that are losing hundreds of millions of dollars from people. So there needs to be a really honest re-examination by funders about what risk means to them, and then what they're going to do to bridge the gaps, because some of these are really minor.
Yeah.
Is it about somebody's credit score? Then get in there and help them fix it. Is it about their business plan? Then you help them plug the holes. In terms of segueing into some of the work that we're doing, we're launching a year-long series, and we will be building on this small business education. We actually have Jeff Pasquarellas joining us next month as we kick it off, talking about choosing the right partners and investors, or choosing a partner or investor, and really which is best for you. We'll be moving into some legal partnerships. We're going to be working with some legal organizations to talk about contracts and business formation. So again, this vital information is something that people need to be able to access either really inexpensively or for free, and they need to be even able to get it at the point of capital. So people that are giving out money need to be offering the education and really just providing what they need to be able to overcome the barriers that they're using to say, no, you're too risky, which again, we know has just been a proxy and a vehicle for systemic racism and lending.
Absolutely.
And I would say this, as we look at the investors where they need to really step it up and take out that conversation of it's too risky, looking at, some of the social equity or even minority. Let's first go to the reality. The reality is access to funding was an issue prior to cannabis for Black and brown businesses. So the SBA has always been known for being a agency within the federal government that really didn't do a good job in connecting with Black and brown owned businesses to get them funding. So now you're talking about the most complex compliance driven industry that has so many stigmas attached to it. Now we're going to want to have resources and funding available. So we have to take the attitude, if we don't, like my mother used to tell me, like, Roz, what happens in my house stays in my house. We take care of each other. This industry has to this industry has to look at it like, how do we take care of each other? Because if we wait to try to see some of the institutional investors and some of the other, and so other like financial instruments that are out there, even with safe banking, my issue with safe banking is, okay, it passes tomorrow. We still got banking issues with Black and brown businesses right now. So does that mean it disappears? No, it doesn't disappear. So I want to challenge folks that are in this industry. If you are a social equity business owner, if you're a minority, if you are someone that you know there has been just pull down, I challenge you to go where the money is, don't give up, and put yourself out there. I know it hurts to get rejected. I know it sucks, but put yourself out there in regards to pitching yourself, putting yourself out there, knowing the language, what to say, bridging the cultural divide. If you wait for anyone else to bridge that divide for you, it may take forever and a day. And I applaud Steve because having a goal of trying to change attitudes, but our businesses that are out there, you bridge that cultural divide, figure out the love language of that investor and talk it, speak it with confidence. And you may see some of the attitudes and the implicit bias that's out there really change. And I want to, last thing is applaud. Prior to COVID-19, I had the opportunity of attending Arcview's investor meetings, the ones that I went to Chicago and New York. And I had an opportunity to see the pitch session, opportunity, of course, to hear Steve, and at the time it was Troy speaking or what have you. Hopefully Arcview, when that happens again, or if you guys are thinking about doing it again, do it. It was so impactful. And when you do it, let's figure out how we bring those people in, because if nothing else, you sit in the room and you learn so much. So that's just my initial thoughts.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Roz. And, you know, you hit on so many great points too. Opening yourself up, getting yourself out there, not being afraid to fail too, because those are really, you know, the things you have to start with too. But so this is from Sam Sheng, and he asked us last night at the Federal Policy Forum, but is there a clearinghouse of where BIPOC founders are getting their capital from, who are reputable institutions that do offer capital? Does anybody have any information on that?
So yes, this question was asked yesterday, and there is no clearinghouse. There isn't a lot, so that to begin with, there isn't a lot of places that they're getting capital. A lot of the capital are coming from existing operators or sort of private funds that own a few. But there aren't people out there really advertising, hey, I want to do this. And I think, again, you're coming back to risk. They want to diversify the risk, so they don't want too many social equity applicants. They want to kind of keep that risk mix right, to be able to keep their investors and shareholders and stakeholders all happy. So the folks that are giving out money may talk about it on the back end. Hey, we have this social equity applicant or this minority business that we've invested in. But in terms of saying, hey, come here, we want to do business with you, that really doesn't exist. And again, I think because there would be an imbalance created. And we've heard this actually directly from the banks with cannabis in general. They don't want too much cannabis business because it shifts the kind of the balance of risk in their portfolio. And I imagine that translates again over to what again would be considered higher risk investments in social equity businesses.
And one last thing I would say, you guys, we got to be careful. I mean, we know that there has been different, from my perspective, different organizations and maybe celebrities and entertainers that have created in conjunction with folks these equity funds. We've seen it in the press. For M4MM, we have not put anyone on our website to say, here's a clearinghouse or here's where you can go for funding outside of making like a connection. I won't put anything on our website because there are some folks that I've seen do and say they're going to have this equity fund. And until we actually see and be able to see the pull through execution, I will not endorse and I will not support. I will connect people, but I'm not going to put a public because we have to. I want to see the proofs in the pudding, and I want to make sure that we protect you. And that's why when Amber talks about there's no clearinghouse, because it's all been kind of theoretical, and we're just hoping that we can see some actual execution. So I want to jump in on that with you, Amber.
I'm in the same boat as Roz. I do get calls from people saying, hey, I've got money and I'm going to give it to, just send them my way. Send them the hard pitch. And I said, well, great. Send me over one of your management agreements or your partnership agreements, and let me take a look at that. And then it's always, no, just send them to me. I am, my other job is an attorney, and so I want to see those contracts. I want to see what they look like. I want to see if they are equitable. And if folks aren't willing to share that and the terms by which they're going to be engaging my community, that's definitely not something. I'm not leading one of my members to a situation like that. But we are, again, partnering with some of our partners, getting together with some of our partners in the legal community and looking at what these agreements need to look like and providing education for our community and how to navigate that and ensure that they are advocating and negotiating from a much stronger position.
That's amazing. Well, I think that's actually the best thing to end on, too. I can't thank all of you enough, Roz, Steve, Amber, and Evelyn. What an impactful conversation. And this is just part one. So we're definitely tapping you guys again. But I'm just going to kind of wrap everything up. You'll notice a webinar survey pop up. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's webinar and also just share topics that you are interested in for future programming. You can also visit arcviewaccess.com and Arcview social media for all the latest and greatest things about Arcview. So in terms of social equity and diversity resources, my colleague Nicole will share the links in the chat. So you will see those pop up. We encourage all of you to visit those. There is also a one-pager from the MCBA on the 4 pillars of equity, the gender parity white papers co-produced by Arcview and NCIA. And in terms of incubator programs, there is the Ease Momentum, which is designed to support and mentor underrepresented founders, the Founders Institute, which is the world's premier pre-seed startup accelerator, and we at Arcview have partnered with them to create the Cannabis Ecosystem Program. There is also the Arcview and Oaksterdam course. The City of San Francisco designated Oaksterdam University an authorized education provider for social equity technical assistance. And Arcview just launched a course with them on how to raise funds for your business. So please visit their website for more information. And M-Procure, which is a program for minorities for medical marijuana, and supplier diversity, training, education, and outreach to minority and small-owned businesses seeking to do that with companies and corporations in the cannabis and hemp industry. We'll also be sending a replay of today's webinars within the next couple of days, and we'll include links to these resources in that replay email. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next program. Thanks. Bye.